he'd always slip me a $20 bill out of his pocket.
Yeah.
And in 60 something, that was huge money for me. The 20, where everywhere else was a 5 or an 8 or a 2, and he'd always give me a 20. So I was.
By the way, you are now on. So
I was a senior in high school, and researched a company called Acton, Acton. Never forget it. Stock on the American Stock Exchange. And I want to say it was $8 or $9 a share, $4 or $5 a share at the time, whatever. And come to find out, the president of the company was John Regas. Okay, and so the priest said, "Mr. Regas, Lou here has a little something that he wants to ask you about." And so I said, what do you think about this? Oh, he said, "I think that would be a very wise purchase." Okay, so fast forward 4 years later, I'm a senior in college. I'm able to sell my Acton stock and pay cash for a brand new car to go student teach, because, right? Now, little did I know, it became Adelphia Cable. If I had held on to it, I probably could have bought the dealership because it would have been worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. All right, so I was right in on the ground floor. It's pretty interesting. And then we played basketball. St. Nick's had a youth basketball team. It was me, my brothers, John, Jim, and his 2 boys. I believe Mark is the older brother, Tim, and there's a younger brother, Mike. Yeah, they played, and we would travel around and play other Greek Orthodox teams in New York State, Pennsylvania, Ohio. And then his son, and I believe it was Tim, and my brother John was quite a basketball player. We're going to go to a summer camp in Massachusetts, and he drove them. You know, he wanted them to go that he came to Jamestown, picked up my kid brother, and his kid, and drove them and stayed in Massachusetts for the week, and they attended this basketball camp. So it was, so later on when he became, involved with the Sabres, it was like, hey, we want to come up to the game. Come on up. It's a great relationship. Great guy.
So you just brought up a couple of interesting points to the uninitiated about the geographical impact of St. Nick's Greek Orthodox Church.
Sure.
We live in Jamestown. You think about Jamestown as being St. Nick's, when in fact it's a broader scope. What is its kind of geography?
As I remember, we would do services in Warren. We'd always rent an Episcopal church because it was closest in vernacular to the Greek type of church. Warren, Pennsylvania, Coudersport, a lot of Greeks there. Wellsville, we would travel to, do services there. Always go to Jim Hastis's hot dog place after the service. That was always a pretty good meal. How many of those could you eat? And that's kind of, I remember doing one in Salamanca, Warren, Coudersport, Port Allegheny, Wellsville, St. Mary's one time. So that was kind of the thing. There was a church in Erie, so we didn't stray too far east, but we certainly went west and south.
As I've been told, this is part of the Detroit Synod or
Archdiocese. Yes.
Thank you. And probably a little bit about your family. I certainly played softball with your dad. That's probably my first introductions to Donning, and then subsequently through the bank with your mother. And talk a little bit about your mom and dad.
First generation immigrants, hardworking. Everything existed for the kids. They dedicated their lives to making sure their kids had a better life than they had. 1954, got married, a Catholic Italian female, an Albanian Greek Orthodox male. Was almost an interracial marriage in 1954. Caused a great deal of stress in both families because all parents, my grandparents, my grandfather and grandmother on the Italian side spoke broken English and Italian in the home, And on the other side, they spoke primarily Albanian, but they knew Greek pretty well, in the home. So this was a culture shock. Also, not a lot of money. I think my mother didn't graduate from high school. My dad is questionable whether he did. He insisted he did, but we never saw the diploma. And they moved in with my grandmother, who had a house on Steel Street, because my father worked at Tillotson's at the time, which was factory was right there. So he was never late to work. It was right across it was right across the street. My mother never worked until we were pretty much, well into high school years. She raised the three boys. I had two brothers, and then took a part-time job at General Hospital in the laundry, and then eventually landed at Key Bank. Relished those jobs, especially the Key Bank job, because she was able to see people on a regular basis and talk to people. So very, very hardworking. Everything they did, again, was for the betterment of the kids and the family. My mother used to always say, "Donnie, we won't have to worry about a thing. The kids will take care of us." So I don't know how much of that we were able to pay back, but not a lot.
What caused your dad to come here? You mentioned first generation. What was the draw?
Would have been my grandfather, grandmother, who came here. They were both, my mother and father were actually born here. So,
Okay, got it.
so my grandfather was already married one time on the Albanian Greek side, and at that time, so this is like the early 1900s, he lost his wife to, unbeknownst to us, some kind of a disease. Went back to Albania, and then just said to my grandmother, "Here we go," in the old arranged marriage ways, and brought her over. They were, I believe, right around 31 or 32 years apart in age. And so I was born in 1956. He died the year before I was born. So I never met my grandfather. My grandmother lived until she was 94 years old. Those old Albanian Greek women in Jamestown lived forever, it seemed like. Great lineage. My aunt, my father's sister, just turned 90 a couple months ago. So there's hope for me. So they landed here because of the community and the church and the other Albanians and or Italians that were already here. I mean, Jamestown is essentially a Italian, Swedish town with a pretty good smattering of Albanians and Greeks. And so they came here because somebody somewhere along the line landed here and said, this is where you need to come. And at the time, they were primarily skilled laborers, a lot of furniture workers in the family, and there was a lot of work here. So they were able to get jobs.
So is that what your grandfather did? Did he gravitate to the furniture business?
Yeah. And so my dad was Tillotson's, Crawford Furniture, Crawford for 38 years until he retired. So yeah, there were a lot of woodworking. They were craftsmen. They were very skilled. I think that's why they end up here. It's church and work.
Speaking of church, there are two churches within shouting distance to each other, the Albanian
Yes.
church, and there's the Greek Orthodox church. How did your dad pick and choose?
So my recollection of that is there was always tension between some of the Albanians and the Albanians who chose to go to the Greek Orthodox Church. Don't know why, don't know where the schism occurred. And I do know that some of the tried and true Albanians that had the Albanian Orthodox Church were very disappointed that a good portion of the other Albanians went to the Greek Orthodox Church, because the religion was always Greek Orthodox. So my father was always under the impression that they just invented this Albanian Orthodoxy just so that they could speak Albanian in the service instead of Greek. In those days, there was no English spoken in any of those services. It was either Greek or it was Albanian. Personally, I loved the Greek portion. Beautiful language, translated tremendously to the musical piece. Albanian's a much harsher language, almost Russian-like, and just didn't adapt well. but my recollection there is they would seldom have services because it was impossible to find an Albanian Orthodox priest. My recollection is they rented somebody from Akron who could come in maybe once every couple of months and do a service, and then the rest of the time there were no services. So yeah, I don't know more than that, but I do know there was a lot of tension between the communities.
So you always grew up in the St. Nick's Creek?
Always, yeah.
And as a youth, where did you go? Was it at the new church, or there's the old one on Chapman? Did you ever go there?
That's where I was born and baptized.
Okay.
I was showing Todd before you arrived. I have a home movie of my brother John's baptism in that church, and I have a home movie of us walking from the old church to the partially built new church, where I was maybe 12 years old, 11 years old as an altar boy. And so I grew up in that church, vividly remember the night the phone rang that the church was on fire and burning down, and how upset everybody was. Because in those days, those were every social event was the focal point was the church. You know, if you had a dinner, it was St. Nick's Fellowship. If you had a softball team, it was the St. Nick's softball team. You had a basketball team, it was St. Nick's basketball team, other than your school stuff. So every social event was centered around that community and the church. And, you know, most of the Albanians and Greeks lived within a snowball's throw of the church. That's really what they all did. Recently my 3 daughters were home, the youngest of whom is 21. I put them in the car and drove them around and showed them where all of those people lived, and how it was a 15-minute trip because they all lived walking distance to the church. And I can remember I lived on Grandin Street, just walking or rolling down the hill to go to church on Sunday morning or any of the other events that were sent.
Did they have Sunday school at the old church?
They did, yeah.
Did you ever go to St. Luke's at all? I mean, some of the more senior folks we've talked to.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I just remember the old church going down.
Can you describe it? You walk in, it's a pretty small structure.
Small structure. A lot of the pews that were in that church were salvaged and brought into the new church when it was built. Some of that wood just didn't burn. Lot of incense and smoke during services. A lot of candles, which obviously was the demise. Pretty full for services. And then there was, in the back pathway downstairs, Fellowship Hall. Very small, but that's where the Sunday school classes were.
Was it when you went to have church services? I think somebody described it kind of male, female. Was it split up?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of bias and prejudice in those days. But and in all of those religions, whether it's Orthodoxy or Catholicism, there is a big part for female in those situations. You had to be male to be an altar boy. Only the males were allowed in the altar. Catholicism very much the same way, but those are traditions that have existed for probably thousands of years, not hundreds of years.
So you're young, born 1956. So you go to the old church and they have Sunday school classes. Was there catechism for you during the school days like the Catholics had, or no?
No, thank God we didn't have those kinds of every once in a while after church we would have a little religious education class of some kind, but Sundays, no other days of the week, because we were there all the time anyway. Whether it was a bowling outing or a picnic or it was just the focal point of your lives socially. So we were there all the time anyway. No need to bring us in anymore. We seemed like we were there every day of the week.
The old church, the cause of the fire, was that determined?
I think it was either electrical or a candle that was not extinguished. I mean, I've had friends in this day and age who've had home fires based on candles that erupted or did what they were supposed to do. But I think the cause was a candle that was left lit.
So your mom and dad get the call. What was started to mention that? But
Get the call. It was just in my lifetime, I remember maybe 2 or 3 phone calls that just caused tremendous emotion in the house, and that was one of those 2 or 3. The other ones would involve death of a family member, a neighbor, a friend, but that was where do you go the next day? You know, the church was the center point of the life. So when you talk about St. Luke's, you know, and I don't remember, I really don't recall, but we did have services someplace else. Maybe that's where they were, because I at the time I had to have been, you know, like maybe just north of 5 years old, 6 years old at the time. But remember the emotion involved in that, you know, vividly.
So, but then shortly thereafter, they decided not to rebuild there, but to build elsewhere.
Right. Yeah.
Do you remember your dad talking about, or your mom talking about the process at all of that?
There seemed to be some controversy at the time, from what I recall, because they decided to build a round church. And if you know anything about Orthodoxy or Catholicism, most of those churches are built essentially in a cross-like fashion, with a straight line down and a cross, and that the old church was kind of constructed that way. So this was radical. I mean, but unique, and some people were very excited about that. Others not so excited. Once it started to be built, then there was uniform excitement, you know, because they were so proud of the fact that it was gonna actually happen. These were not people with lots of money or resources, so the fact that they were I'm sure every last penny of anything liquid financially went towards the building of that church. It was a drain and a strain on those people, but it was important, so they got it done. There was also some concern that the archdiocese would not approve the plans of a round church, as I recall. But so ultimately, it must have been approved, because it happened, and it was built and consecrated. The bishop came. It was a big deal, and here we are.
Do you remember that?
I do. I was in the altar. I was an altar boy at the time.
So, just to kind of bring us from me going to some other church, not defined, but then ultimately day one comes, and you are now an altar boy.
Altar boy, and I was altar boy in the old. I made it to altar boy in the old church, just barely, but full-fledged after that. And I do actually recall that once they cleaned that church up, it took some time, that we were able to have some services in the old church after the fire, before we made the transition to the new place. But you couldn't really use the basement. You weren't really allowed to go down there. There were, walls were charred. It was quite an interesting experience when we actually had services there.
So the bishop comes. You're going to consecrate the new church. I'm visualizing literally a march of people from the old church to the new church. Is that?
Yes,
accurate?
Yeah. I have video.
Make sure you get it.
I have video of that. And on 3 occasions. The first occasion was a march from the old church to chalk line in the grass as to where the new church was going to be built. Mm-hmm. The second move, and now I'm fully strapped up as an altar boy in that one, was a service held right on the front entrance way, cement, because there was a cement foundation, a couple of walls, and then the third one was when we actually were going to have the first service there. Don't have video of that one that I found yet. I'm still looking, but exciting times. It was quite a deal. And when the bishop consecrated, in the Greek church, they put what is believed to be remains of saints into the table, and I remember them cutting a hole into the altar table, and somehow everybody keeps asking me, because I was there, but I only remember one saint, and I remember St. Andrew, and it was apparently bones from fingers that the archdiocese sent with the bishop, and there was a mixture, and it got all poured in, and then that gets permanently sealed, and they wrap the table, and so it's never been opened since. It can't be opened. So quite a deal. Like the Pope or a bishop in the Catholic Church, only the bishop can stand in a certain place and do certain things, and it was a very big deal at the time.
So, to this day, that particular table is there.
Yes,
But it can't be used, obviously.
it is used for services. Yeah,
services, okay.
but it's covered. Yeah,
Covered,
so
okay.
yeah, that square, which I recall as being like 5 by 5, maybe, was permanently sealed. Yeah, and the current priest insists that there has to be remnants of 3 saints in there. I don't know who the other 2 are, so I could make up names and they'd probably go with it. But
Yeah. St. Louis.
That's right.
So you're talking about priests.
Yeah.
As you remember your earliest days, who was the give me a little chronology of the priests you remember.
All of them. Father Mentis, who was the priest in the video I have of baptizing my brother. Kuklis, who was the priest that was here when the church was being built. Carlutsos, Bacillus, Raphael, Andrew Mahalaris, George Alexson, Father Alexson. All good priests, all have their own fun experiences and features. Of course, the Catholics in Jamestown will tell you about, when they got the ruler on the fingers from the nuns, or Kuklis, Father Kuklis was when I was the altar boy, and he would, he'd give you a little kick in the shin if he had to, or tap with the bottom of the candlestick if you're joking around in the altar, or eating more of the bread that you're supposed to, or getting caught in the back room not doing what you should be doing. But yeah, good times.
Father Kuklis' son was at school with me. Of course, Father Nick was very much such a prominent figure. Do you recall the debate around the actual services, it going from just solely Greek to partially English?
I think it's still ongoing. I mean, that'll never probably go away. But anyone who's probably 45 or older would just prefer it not to change. And there are a number of descendants or younger people now who, the kids don't speak Albanian or Greek anymore, and so they prefer it to be in English. Again, I'm a traditionalist. I don't mind the words being spoken in English, but the music doesn't adapt to the English language. It was written in Greek, sounds better in Greek. We're trying to adapt it to English. It just doesn't work.
So here we are, 2020. Give me a normal service. So if how does it work?
Well, they're very much like the Catholic Church. They're called a liturgy, and there are several distinct parts to it. But the crescendo leads up to consecrating of the gifts, bread and the wine, the blood and the body, communion, and then you kind of wind it down, and you're off to the races. Over the years, I recall some priests who light that up in 51 minutes. That would be over, and there are some priests that our heads were hitting the back of the pew about an hour and 40 minutes into the deal, depending on how it was going that particular Sunday. So they're long services, and sometimes they can be grueling, but you just went through it.
So I can recall vividly playing church league softball and against your dad, who was a catcher.
Sure.
And watching your dad in the fast pitch for many years, and always enjoying his company. But I know you all played, and who were some of the names of some of the players, because that's often a remembrance of the non-Greek community is the athletic teams.
Well, they would always allow 3 quote unquote outsiders to play on your team because you had to submit a roster to Jack Fulford and Russ Dietrich at the Parks Department, and they would religiously check that to make sure you were all members. So Russ Eklund pitched fast, because Churchley was fast pitch in those days. Russ Eklund pitched. My dad caught. Carl Johnson, who his nickname was Fishy, so they caught. Don't ask me why. Played shortstop. Great ball player. Those are the 2 guys that I remember. But after, through the years, we had guys like Mark Edstrom play with us, Jimmy Young, Tom Benson, some of these guys that are great athletes at Jamestown High School, and it wasn't just softball; it was basketball. Tom Buttaferro, John Trusalo, and we'd put an S on the end of the name, so they would we put them on the roster. It was Tom Buttaferros, John Trusalo, so they all became Greek guys. Benson was a tough get, but we somehow finagled him in some way. But yeah, and these were, we had Tom and Mark Constantine, Jim and Steve Cummings, Lou John Jim Deppas, Pete Demas. So we had a great core of ball players, and as we aged, we kept getting better and better. And then we got to the point where we were all like in our late teens or early 20s. And I just recall for a number of years, we kind of dominated the church league because we were young, we were fast, we had Russ Eklund pitching. It was just a blast. It was a great time.
Yeah, we mentioned this last time about a guy. I remember he smoked a pipe that much. And he had pardon? George.
Help me. George, was he a Demas?
George Demas. There was George Tolga.
No,
Louis Demas.
He was a pitcher.
Oh.
And he had kind of I want to say it was the club foot, like he had a little disability. Yeah. So anyways, that's my...
George Serrell.
It must have been, yeah.
George Serrell, yeah. He
That I
pitched. Yeah, he did pitch.
Because I go
Before Russ Eklund.
that far back.
Wow, that was a pretty good one.
Yeah. And I, just an aside, I was one of those guys recruited by CMA. Dewey West.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I remember Dewey.
Yeah, Dewey had Kenny Martin. And
Kenny Martin played shortstop.
Yeah.
With those CMA would early on they were the team to beat. Epworth was another team to beat. And then you guys got old.
No, got married.
We took over.
Yeah. And then I just an aside, I remember Dewey. I was one of the 3 that was invited in to play as a catcher. They needed a catcher, and I was it. And then all of a sudden we got one of the Newbauer boys as a pitcher. And Dewey said, "Greg, you are now going to become a active member of the CMA church. That means you will be showing up, and I'm taking church." So sure enough, I would show up to church.
You had to have those 3 outsiders. You would check them out.
3 outsiders, and then if you're not an outsider, you got to show up.
That's right.
Yeah. Anyways, I digress. But yeah, sports was very much part of the St. Nick's and how it was known. Did you, as you mentioned earlier, traveling? Was there a league within the St. Nick's youth? Among various.
Yeah, there's a Buffalo Church, an Erie Church, Rochester, Syracuse, us, of course. We went as far west as Cleveland, a couple, 3 churches there, and we would play each other in basketball. That was the big sport when we traveled that we played. So mainly tournaments because it was too far to have regular games, but the tournaments were really great because now we could bring up the Regis boys and the Monakas boys from Warren. These were all great kids, great athletes. So it was kind of like in some cases almost an all-star high school basketball team. Yeah, because they were all stars in their original high schools and got to play with us.
As the church has evolved, and what has been the big challenge? And once it starts off with just Albanian Greek people who've immigrated over there in this part of the world, to a stated mission of growth you aren't getting many immigrants. So
No. Yeah. So if you watch My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the you know the main character says there's two kinds of people in the world: those people that are Greek and everybody else. And that wasn't far from the truth when he utters that phrase. And so, you know, you can't. It's difficult in a small community like this to grow that base. Okay, because like my mother and father, Greeks are not always marrying Greeks here, and Albanians aren't always marrying Albanians, and consequently, they're having kids and looking for different experiences in different places, and so in order to grow, you have to keep your people involved, and yet reach out to the community and try to find other people that might be interested in your kind of older traditional type of service.
yeah, I've noticed the committee for the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church Vision 2022 consists of Tim Anderson, Greg Anderson, Angie Turner, Brian Cummings, Liz Frederick, Betty Pappas, Greek name.
Yep, that's the only one.
There's some lady named Alexis, married to some guy.
Yeah. So some Greeks on there, but not a lot of Greek names.
That's right.
Because that's exactly what's happening. Tim Anderson, who's president of the church council right now, is married to my niece, and no Greek, mostly Albanian in her. Okay, but you know her mother and father were not both Albanian, so it just kind of diffuses. But to keep them involved and active, the church has had to change in a lot of ways. We run the Yasu Festival now. There's a pretty active Sunday school. And in all churches are facing that crisis. How do you get people involved? How do you get them to come? So I think they're doing a pretty good job.
Part of that is the outreach program which the church has had with the Yasu Festival. Do you remember its origination?
Oh yeah, we for years had bingo on Thursday nights, like many of the Catholic churches. And when bingo got legalized in New York State, there was a bingo game every night in the city of Jamestown, and some nights too. So we were able to get on that bandwagon early and had a mortgage on the new church and paid off the mortgage by hosting those Thursday night bingo games. Didn't matter what the weather was, didn't matter how many people showed up. And my dad, who was the spearhead of that, bingo movement, looked forward to every Thursday night calling. He was the caller. That was his gig. And they did it. Paid off the mortgage. Father Raphael became the priest. Wasn't a big fan of quote-unquote gambling on church property. Came up with a better idea. We should host a festival. And so the idea with eliminating the bingo piece was to start a festival which would replace the income. And the need had kind of fallen off because the mortgage had been paid off. But we did play bingo at the first festival, which just kind of old habits would die really hard. But after that, bingo was eliminated at the church, and the festival just kept on growing year after year.
Was it modeled off of other festivals like in Buffalo and other places?
Yeah, Buffalo had already been established, and they were really successful. Andy Hennis, who was a guy lived in Buffalo, but remembered growing up with him, had a lot of input with how we should do it and what should happen. In the early days, we were kind of like trying to find our way. Some things have disappeared, and others have cropped up over the years, but I think the formula is pretty well down now as far as running that.
It's been going for 20-some years.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you know the number?
37.
30. Yeah. I'll give you an idea.
Yeah. Thanks. And your family has grown up in that. Do your families continue that Greek tradition there?
Yeah, but yes. So my oldest child has been baptized Greek Orthodox. The other two were not. At some point in time, the Sunday school program there faded from existence, and so we ventured into another church just to give them a Sunday school experience. But you always find your way back. There's no leaving St. Nick's. So yeah, they're involved, and now I'm thrilled. My niece is there. Her husband Tim is heavily involved, and my brother Jim has passed, but my brother John is also still a member.
What's unique about a Christmas service at St. Nick's?
Every service is unique at St. Nick's.
I mean, to the uninitiated.
When you get married at St. Nick's, there's you may not know what's going on, but there's no doubt you are married at the end of that service. You are walking around tables and you're putting crowns on your head, and everything is done in threes. So, all of those services, Easter week, we always got a great deal on the chocolate Easter candy, because our Easter was always, it seemed like a week later than the American Easter, and all the candy went on sale, so we got, great deals on that. But, there was always that stigma growing up that, our services were different than everybody else's services. And I just think at the time, you didn't really appreciate how beautiful those services were if they were done the right way. Easter to me was always my favorite time. Holy Week, so we call it. There's a service every night, starting with Palm Sunday, but always at a different time than the American Easter. Once every I don't know how many years we fall on the same day, but almost never. So that was always interesting. Trying to explain that to your buddies at school.
Well, and seemingly every hot dog location wherever I've been has been run by Greeks.
Yeah.
And
smart
every
people.
candy store run by Greeks.
Smart people.
Why is that?
I think they knew the clientele could afford the product, and it was something that they could start relatively inexpensively. Growing up, I remember always walking with my father to Frank Butterferro's barber shop, and we were always willing to go, which was underneath Van's Texas Hots, because after the haircut we got to go and get the hot dogs. So, and there are stories that can't go on videotape about that, but we had a great time.
Yep, Vans. Yep. Though I must confess, when we were at the Regis's, interviewing him, they were talking about the hot dog stand in Wellsville.
Yeah.
And when we got done at about 5 o'clock or so, I said goodbye to everybody, because I drove down separately. And Wellsville is not directly between Countersport and Jamestown.
No,
so you had to go
straight
here.
up.
But I stopped there and I kept texting, Alexis and Todd and saying, hey, wish you were here, but you're not. I am.
That's great. It's great.
Which is another reason to go to Wellsville. So, is we're here kind of interviewing you because you are such an aspect in the community. And also, there had to be a time when, or was there a time, that's more of a question, was there a time when the congregation said, we'd like you, the pastor, the minister, to sort of be involved in the community? I think of Father Nick particularly, because he was just so omnipresent.
Right.
I suspect not every minister that I've known in my world sometimes thinks outreach isn't that important or involved. Was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, prior to him, I really don't remember. The outreach really dealt primarily with the membership of the church. He brought that new aspect to that, which I think part of the Yasu Festival was part of that, and he was involved with a lot of the seniors in town and a lot of those things. So that was kind of the beginning of that movement as far as the church, and it's kind of continued, since then. So yeah, prior to that, it was a very closed type of community. That's my recollection, and I don't mean that in a negative connotation. It's just the way it was. I mean, we in the older ways, you were different from everybody else. I mean, I can remember multiple languages being spoken in the home when I was growing up, and and every once in a while, like when the funniest story is when we would play church league softball, we would give all the signs verbally in Albanian because nobody would understand what we were saying. So we like the word chichka is like really, you know, like for bunt, like that's a right. So somebody would say nyachichka, which meant like you're gonna bun it, right? Or so no one figured out the signs because no one could speak Albanian other than the team.
Nice. Little did I know what was going on.
There you go. He could have. Houston Astro, you could have stole all the signs had you known how to speak Albanian. Right?
Without beating a drum. Did you, as you went out, as you got involved in, did you, well, get back up again, back to Father Nick, because churches, many churches, including, I know where you're somewhat insular, your flock is your own. They want the minister to make sure they take care of their own flock,
Right.
which is often a stretch because your stretch reaches so far. Did you find that because of the geographical sense, was that a strain on going out and doing communions in Wellsville and
Oh yeah, that was a lot. That's when you became a priest for St. Nick's. That was a big commitment because it was expected that you were going to go and do these services, and in like the Catholic Church, Greek, very similar. There's a lot of demand for services in and of itself. Right? So in the last week, I think there were 3 services in addition to the Sunday morning liturgy that the priest would be required to perform. So in a week where you're traveling, you know, you're doing, usually those services would occur on a Saturday. That was my recollection, a Saturday morning. So the Saturday became the Sunday, only it was in Wellsville or Coudersport or someplace else. So that was a tough get. And so ultimately, the old days where priests stayed here a long time, I think has changed in the last 25, 30 years because it's a drain. It's not you're parked in one place and doing it. You're moving.
Is there a time or an Easter perhaps, Christmas, where it's expected to come, those outliers would come to the mother church?
Absolutely, yeah. You just knew your Easter service in midnight mass liturgy was always packed, and your Sunday afternoon Easter service was always packed. Palm Sunday always packed, and that's not necessarily because the local people just decided to show up. It was because all the outliers showed up, and so I can remember those were the days when I would see the Regises and the Bachakises and the Hastases and all the Monacases and all the people from the outlying areas showing up. And they were friends, but you didn't get to see them that often.
Yeah. So, if you had to give some sort of message, because you're an impact guy, Lou Deppas, I'm not blowing you up with a glory gun, but you're an impact guy in the community. As you would look at their 2022 vision, what would you think their hope for results might be, which ultimately might be an ongoing legacy of the church?
Right, and I think that I hate to use the word marketing because it's a church. Okay, it doesn't really require any marketing. However, I think there has to be more vision with regards to outreach in the community, trying to bring non-Greeks, non-Albanians, non-Orthodox people in. I think that people in general are looking for something. They really don't know what it is. All churches are struggling to kind of fulfill that need, and I think that we can do a better job with that. So I'm in talking with some of the people that are involved in the committee. They want to have a sign out front that's lit up, and a lot of times I don't think people even know what goes on in that round building at the top of the hill. But
I can remember I went to the Chandler Street Baptist Church, Hillcrest Baptist Church. My mother lived on 48 Chapman. She knew everybody in the church. They all, still to this day, many of them come up and hug me for no other reason than I'm Gladys' son.
Right, you're there.
So as you again look at the 20 years down the road, you talked about social media. Maybe they adopt the Greek guy with the Milwaukee Bucks.
Mm-hmm.
He's my,
Let's bring him in.
yeah. He's my
You can't even say that last name.
I can't
No.
again. I'll end up.
G, we call him.
And as far as programs, ministries, anything specific you might use for that social media aspect of it, you've seen that. You've seen it play out a little bit at the National Comedy Center, and I've seen it in other organizations that use that.
And you know, I'm a traditionalist. When someone gets married in the Greek church, you know they're married. Someone gets baptized in the Greek church, you know they're married. If you watched My Big Fat Greek Wedding, that's as a legitimate view of what happens as possible. I wouldn't let go of those traditions. I'd keep them intact, and I think that the general population can find its way there. But everybody we're always ambassadors of our own situation. And so, yeah, we're doing better. I get an email with announcements now. I think that's a major step forward. So we can do better at marketing with regards to what we do and how we do it. You know, even getting involved with our choir, singing with other massed choirs in Jamestown, is just like a step in the right direction.
Do you guys video your services? Ever thought of doing it?
No. That's a
No,
good idea.
Well, one of the things that
I know someone has a YouTube channel. Throw it right up there.
throw out a little. Jackson just mentioned them, and you're up.
You're up. That's right.
At 11, but I know St. Luke's and others, because really, essentially, it's putting a tripod up
And doing it.
and there's public access.
Public access TV, going by there and seeing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just a thought out along those lines. And I hope that, frankly, some of this stuff that's being interviewed, that Todd is grabbing, as things progress, you get those snippets, you know, St. Luke's Church, so you can actually put it up and send it.
Right.
You know, you have an amazing story. Others have had an amazing story, and it runs the gamut. There'll be more, I'm sure. In fact, when Alexis called way back when, saying this is what we're doing, you have any ideas? You know, Greg, because you're an idea guy, I guess. And I said, just videotape people. And
That's a great idea.
you got to grab it while you can. And we've had some really interesting interviews, and well, while you can, more than anything else.
Sure.
And so that's why we're here with you, Lou, and make sure we get yours, because, you know, while we can.
That's right. Careful. Every day's a blessing, Greg.
You're so much. I learned you're so much younger than me today.
Yeah.
So, any parting words or any questions you might have?
Just, what do you, if you had your dream, Lou, what would you see inside of the walls of the church and the hall 20 years from now?
Good question. Have to give that some thought. But, you know, back in the day when I directed the choir there was a choir loft and a really nice organ. It'd be nice to get back to that stuff, because it's changed dramatically. I love the stained glass windows and those things. I certainly think there are some improvements that could be made physically that require some money, but I don't have a tremendous vision for how much we can change that. Maybe there needs to be an addition of some kind to the existing church, maybe a smaller place for baptisms and weddings and things like that. But yeah, I'm spitballing.
Spitball well. Thank you, Lou.
And you know, that's the other piece is you know, I was a musician by trade, grew up singing in the choir, and then eventually became the choir director, and remember them eventually saying, you know, you're driving from Fredonia College, because when I graduated from high school, them giving me a $50 a month honorarium to cover the gas, which over the years that grew into, I think, $50 a week, which to me was like winning the lottery. Helped put me through college. And at age 9, because all of the choirs of all those churches we mentioned earlier are part of the Mid-Eastern Federation of Greek Orthodox Churches. They used to have a convention every year and have a mass choir sing the liturgy. And I was fortunate at age 19 to be the youngest guy in the whole deal to guest conduct the 300 and something 20 voice choir in Columbus, Ohio. That my sophomore year in college was probably the coolest experience I'd had. Been able to travel all over. So the musical part of the whole is a big deal to me. You know, so preserving that side of it is important.
Well, I think part of that is preserving it so that there be some social media aspect to it, because you remember it fondly, but nobody else will remember it
Yeah, I
once
think
you're gone.
it's a great point.
So to the extent that I'm such a big fan of this stuff, you gotta just point and shoot and grab it and deal with it. But especially the music, because music is beautiful.
Yeah,
It's just beautiful
yeah.
stuff. So,
it's great.
well, you've been great. Thank you for your time.
Always a pleasure, Greg. Always a pleasure with you.
By the way, while we're on camera, I'll say this. I was tooling around on YouTube, and for reasons I'm not sure, but somehow it stopped when you took the band to New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and I was actually on one of those hotels when you were there at Macy's, and then you went to Letterman. That whole scene. There's an hour-long YouTube piece of Lou and taking the band and marching into the Letterman show, marching out, all of that. It's spectacular.
Yeah, always.
It's spectacular.
It's almost like a pinch me kind of
Yeah.
thing. How we were able to do, you know, never forget. We went to that was the second time we went to New York. First time was 1984. Did the Macy's parade. I was all of maybe 27 years old at the time. Came home. Jim McElrath was a chaperone on the trip. I said, Mac, can we go down and let me in the office? We'll check our mailboxes because we've been gone for 5-6 days. Come on, let's go. So we went down, checked the mailboxes, and I pulled out a letter and opened it up, and it was the acceptance letter to the Rose Bowl parade, which was 13 months later. And I went, hey, Mac, come on over and take a look at this. And he goes, oh my God, Mr. Deppas, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to go. So there we were 13 months later, marching down Colorado Boulevard. It was an unbelievable time of my life. But then 89, back to Macy's, and that's when we were on Letterman doing the viewer mail theme. And never forget that it was broadcast whatever time it was, 12:30 in the morning, Letterman. And we were every door in the hotel was open and all the TVs were on because we had 190 kids there watching Letterman show. And when the band comes out, the whole place just screaming. You could hear they probably heard it in the street, and the security in the hotel went crazy. You know, calling my room. You got to shut those kids up, and it's just great stuff. It's great stuff.
So, anyways, that's preserved. The point is that's preserved. It's not just a corporate memory.
Right.
It is preserved, and it's a well done.
It's great.
And I remember we lived grandparents, my parents, and the in-law lived in New Jersey. So they took a hotel room on the 4th floor, right on the parade route. You guys were there.
Yeah.
Well, all good stuff. Well, you've been you've accomplished so much, Lou. And I'm not again here to blow you up to your glory gun, but
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Can I go back? Thank you.
Thank you.
How can I get your own movies?
I have to copy the disc.
Okay. You want to put it on a jump drive? I have one available.
I have a thing at home that I can
Okay.
because it's long, and there's a lot of stuff you don't want. I can just get those segments and throw it on there. But,
yeah, I can. You don't have to worry about, making it easy on me. Just you could throw me large files that are just.
Yeah. I'll get it there.
Yeah, we actually got some stuff from the Reguses too. There's
Quite a bit, yeah.
You gave me a lot, yeah.
Well, they gave me a lot about the Regus family, but there's
No, I meant, they gave Todd just
Yeah.
3 or 4
So
little
they're
tribes.
this is like.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So that's my great uncle Seraphim Deppas. one
Yes.
P,
I'm right here.
standing in front of the, you know, but I gotta go back. So like this is John David,
Oh, it's colored, fantastic.
that's me right there. That's me,
Yep.
yeah.